Hi, I'm Rym. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement here at the Harvard Innovation Labs. Today, with my friend Pete here, we'll be talking about how to build a strong team, all the way from like the co-founding team to hiring to how to building culture, etc. So I'm really excited about the conversation. We actually had one yesterday on a call asking, I'm a solo founder. I'm actually considering now looking for a co-founder. How do I go about it? What's the best way? Where do I find them? What kind of conversations?
What advice do you give?
So I asked first the question, I said, if you had $1 million today, would you actually have a co-founder or hire someone, right? So that already illustrates like, am I doing this just because I'm lonely and because everybody else is doing it? Or actually, no, there is really a need because that co-founder could offer complementary skills or maybe connections to another market, etc. So we had a little bit of a conversation on the why, and also we talked all about because he was going about, he wanted to find ways or like a structured way to go about it. And oftentimes co-founders, maybe they met in school before or like they know each other, like they have some relationship, right? So we discussed a little bit also like what's important in terms of alignment on vision, mission, values, these types of things, and how important is that. And we talked a lot about how important is actually to date before you marry. Like try actually a project maybe with that person and see if it's a good fit or not. So I think that's probably one of the single most important decision that these founders need to make and could have major implications going forward. So I feel like in the advising, I'm sure you cover many topics, but this one in particular, almost like we have to bring it up to most of the very early stage team to make sure that they do the things right.
I've had so many founders who found someone super enthusiastic, brought them on, and then realized, wait, they don't actually have the skill set to do what I've
Mhm.
brought them on to do. But your point about, would you hire them or would they be a co-founder is a really important point also. From I always push my founders to be like, you want it to be a trial period
Mm.
because you don't know until you work with someone and you face hard decisions if this is someone you can really work with. Because
Yeah.
I've had a lot of teams just implode because co-founders don't get along, don't have the same vision, don't have the same level of commitment to the project. And you also have to be a little leery if someone's
Mm.
excited to just jump in and be a co-founder, like that's almost a red flag because they should be just as cautious as you because this isn't a semester decision. This is like a 5 or 10 year decision. Like it's a big deal.
It must be tricky also the students because some of them are here to explore or like try something and the goal maybe is more to learn than anything else, and others are really serious about their venture and building it and scaling it. So like different individuals will come with different goals in terms of personal goals, but also capacity. How do you advise them around that fluctuation that could happen and also how they should be communicating, etc., to make sure that this doesn't implode like you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, I force them to have the conversation early because there's just all that animosity comes if one person's shouldering the burden of it and someone else is off wanting to have a more college experience because it comes with sacrifice, like you said. And
Yeah.
a lot of them don't appreciate that because they also think entrepreneurship is a lot easier than it is. And then once they start, they're like, oh my God, this is hard and I'm doing the sacrifice. And some people just don't want it. So you have to have those conversations earlier because it's either you're going to have the conversation early and everyone's sort of aligned, or it's just going to blow up when someone starts to feel really taken advantage of by other co-founders.
Do you also get questions on how they deal with equity, etc.?
Yeah,
How do you go about advising them on that also?
that's the biggest question once you get it to who should I find. It's what's the equity? Because also a lot of times, because I'm dealing with students, right? They're doing it voluntarily. These are early, they don't have revenue. So the whole idea of would you hire someone? Would you make them a co-founder? Hiring's not really an option because there's no money
Mm.
to pay someone. So they're almost like offering co-foundership as a way to compensate, which is really expensive. But if that's your
Mhm.
only option, so then it becomes who gets what. And there's a sense of, oh, if I had the idea, I get more equity. And at the end of the day, it's not about who had the idea, it's who's doing the most work, or
Execution.
who's putting in the most resources, whether that's money or time, and then ultimately what role are you going to play? Because the CEO should get more than the CMO or the CTO. You want everyone to be happy, and everyone has different expectations or needs, right? There are some people who care more about compensation than equity, and so you can structure something where fine, once you get funding, this is the first person to get a salary. Like, you have to understand what everyone's motivation. But then I found online some really good like co-founder calculators
Yes.
where it prompts a lot of
I've used
questions and then it assigns equity, and I'm like, this isn't the answer, this is a starting point for a conversation, because it's a really emotional decision, and the worst thing you can do is force people to agree. And again, there's this animosity because someone feels they're getting less than they deserve or someone gets more, because again, that ultimately rears its ugly head and then there's fighting.
Hmm.
So what I like about that calculator is makes it less emotional, and no one can give you the answer because everyone has different motivations. But at least it's a sort of third party simulation that's not driven by one person with an agenda.
Hmm. Sometimes these things are a little bit more difficult when you deal with like social impact ventures,
Yeah.
because it's not about just the profit, it's also the impact side. And you know, the early teams don't necessarily start measuring impact in a quantifiable way to be able to think that way as well. So it's a little bit trickier for those teams,
Yeah.
how to think about co-foundership and all that.
Yeah, and even raising money,
Mhm.
because a lot of the social impact ones, because they don't focus on making money, it makes it a lot harder to have investor discussions,
Yeah.
and that gets tricky because you have to understand how you're going to lay out your equity before we start going and talking to investors.
So we also have in some of the pre-LX teams where a team or like a founder is already working with someone, um, kind of more in the tech side, and kind of testing and thinking about, should I actually bring that person as a co-founder? I wonder if you face also situations like this where people are actually going about this dating before marrying, and like how do you advise them on when to do that transition, how to go about it in a more kind of formal, structured way, also, and what kind of conversation they need to have with that particular team members who potentially would become, in the final
Yeah, I
table.
mean, I lay out exactly what you said, right? It should be this sort of dating. Have a project, work on it together, see how well you work, see if it makes sense. So there's the working relationship. How well do you work together? And then the other element is how solid are there's two elements. One is, let's say it's someone to build the tech. If you're not a tech venture and once you have your tech, you're sort of done with that part, and now it's about the real driver of the business, you don't want to make someone a co-founder if their value goes down over time. Because what I've seen happens is
Got it.
you've you bring on a tech co-founder, now the tech is not
Mhm.
a big driver, and you have someone with all this equity that's not as important day to day or for driving the future of the company. And then that's where animosity is also. So does people's importance stay over time? And then the second part of that, which I see happen a lot, is if you bring people on too quickly, a lot of times this early, your strategy changes, right? I'm B2C, now we're B2B, or and you bring
Pivot.
someone on with a skill set that's no longer needed. Like again, if I'm a B2C company and I hire a B2C marketer, I bring on a CMO who's a B2C specialist, and then we realize that's not the right thing and we pivot, you now have someone with the wrong skill set. So I've also had teams have to talk to co-founders or people they've hired, and like, your background's now no longer relevant, and that's a really hard conversation to have.
That founding team probably like defines a lot of the elements of the culture. And culture is just not something you put on a nice website. My values are blah blah blah. It's
Yeah.
actually lived, and it has to be practiced. The thing is, over time, your team grows, more people come in, etc. So I think what's important is that many of the foundational elements, like values, for example, have to remain constant. Whereas, like the rituals, like how you work together, or how you run your meetings, how you document things, etc., is what changes over time. And for someone who's a founder, has to be really deliberate about, thinking about what's the plan here. Like at different times, things change. How do I go about maintaining the foundational stuff, the anchoring solid, but also like modifying everything else so that the dynamic can still of the work like can continue in a productive way, etc.
Yeah, I mean, the conversations I've had with founders as it relates to culture is culture comes from the top, and you may not know it, but everyone on your team is watching you and mirroring your behavior. Are you working? What time do you get in the morning? Are you working during the day? Are you on your phone? How fast do you reply to emails or Slacks or whatever it is? Like whether you want to or not, you set the tone and you create the culture, and you need to have some awareness for that because people are going to start mirroring your behavior, whether you want it or not.
And I think like successful teams is when everybody can bring themselves into the team and some elements of their culture as well.
Yeah.
So the question is always like, as the team grows, how do you continue to build like this mosaic, right, all along? And it might be different from T0 to T1 to T2, etc. While like, okay, you are still the leader trying to push for a certain way of doing things, culture, etc. But as new people come in, they can infuse some of themselves
Yeah.
in it, and I think that's really more an art than science. But it's super important if you want people to still, want to continue to work and feel ownership of what you're building and want to like push things forward, etc. So that's really, really tricky, but it's super important. Yeah.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just, hey, we're every Thursday we go to lunch together, or we have these stand-up meetings and everyone gets to talk. Even to the things, and I've had to walk a founder through this, like letting someone go. Like that's a really hard thing to do, but how you do it and how you
Hmm.
communicate it to even the rest of the teammates has a big
Huge.
impact on the culture. And that's no one goes into this thinking about letting someone go and how they would do it. Like, and that's not normally people's strong suit. They're about building their product or understanding their customer. But those have really big impact on the team and how people feel about working for that venture.
And I think finding a way also to show how that everyone is super valued and like really, you know, highlighting their contribution, etc., whether it's on social media or during like all staff or,
Yeah.
it's very important as well. Again, it's a matter of can your team feel that they also own, this thing
Yeah.
that we're building and they want it. The success of that thing is their success. How do we get to that point?
Yeah.
We deal with a lot of AI companies here,
Yeah.
right? AI seems to be like now also a team member,
Yeah.
right? Or a co-founder
Yeah.
sometimes, right? You see like some people talking about we might end up with a single founder
Right.
building this $1 billion company.
Yeah.
So like no team, no interns, no co-founder, none of that. How have you seen things shift over the last few years when AI become a little bit more dominant, I guess, in the way they adopt it?
The bigger impact is probably me and my relationship with them because instead of getting advice from me, they're going to get it from ChatGPT.
Mhm.
Um, Teams can be smaller, but I'm already dealing with teams of one or two.
Mhm.
And so they're leveraging it to try to test their ideas quicker, like
Mhm.
using a website generator or other things. I've yet to have a student come in who's like, oh, I was going to hire a co-founder to do X, but now I'm using
Mhm.
um, AI. I mean, it's certainly around the corner, but I think what it means is that students can just try stuff faster, fail faster, and hit on what they want to do. But there's still that social element because entrepreneurship is so hard and it can be lonely. Like the biggest issue for solo founders is how isolating it is because it's a lot of ups and downs. So I think there's always going to be a need for other people. It just might be a co-founder, not
Mhm.
two or three, and they use technology to sort of fill those gaps.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see, like, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
They could look a lot different 3 years from now, the teams,
mhm.
than today.
The other model we're seeing more and more now is hiring a fractional,
Yeah, fractional CFOs or
CFO,
CMO.
CMO, whatever, etc. Are you seeing many of those
I
or?
mean, that takes a budget.
Uh,
So, like, the teams I deal with, they just don't have the money for, but it makes sense, especially as they're continuing to flush out where they wanna go. And there are VC firms who will say, "We have good access," like, "We'll help supply this, or we'll direct you to good ones." So, I think they're seen as a really positive,
Mhm.
addition to a venture that's really early.
Yeah, we're seeing it more often, obviously, on more advanced teams.
Yeah.
Also, like, I think for many founders is really kind of how they plan. I mean, in terms of cash flow, like what they have in terms of maybe at this point they need all these people to help,
Yeah.
and then here is only much fewer people, and like how do you deal with the fluctuation of, hiring and maybe holding some of the hiring,
Yeah.
downsizing, etc., is really tricky also for them because they're still in a very fluctuating mode and they don't have the means, to spend that money. So they resort to these types of things as
Yeah.
well. So it's temporary,
Yeah.
percentage based or whatever.
Yeah, and gives flexibility because,
Yeah.
like we talked about, by bringing on a co-founder, a full-time CMO or CFO is not cheap, both financially and from an equity standpoint. So the fact that this role now exists is great. The question is, the teams I've seen that have used them have been real people. Are they going to look to AI to be their fractional CMO, CFO? And is that going to displace that role? I'm sure someone's going to build something and try. It'll be interesting to see if it gets traction.
Pete, this was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, we have to do it more often.
I know, right? Yeah. So thank you for listening and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time.